This is Glenn Marhefka, and you're listening to The Other Side of the Bell.
Hello, and welcome to The Other Side of the Bell, a podcast dedicated to everything trumpet, brought to you by Bob Reeves Brass. We'll help you take your trumpet playing to the next level. I'm John Snell, trumpet specialist at Bob Reeves Brass, and I'll be your host for this episode. My special guest today is trumpeter Clint Baker. We'll get to Clint's interview here in a moment after a word from our sponsor and some trumpet news. Today's episode is brought to you by Bob Reeves Brass, who share your passion for creating extraordinary music. You know that feeling when your instrument just clicks and the music flows effortlessly? That's what Bob Reeves Brass has been helping customers do since 1968. We've helped brass musicians like you achieve their dreams by ensuring their equipment is always in perfect harmony. We know you want to immerse yourself in the art of music making, and we're here to remove any barriers between you and your creative vision. At Bob Reeves Brass, we work closely with you to understand your unique needs and provide tailored solutions like valve alignments, custom-fit mouthpieces from our extensive stock models or a hand-carved custom mouthpiece, gap adjustments with the Reeves sleeve system, or even tweaking your existing gear. No matter your level of experience, we offer free consultations and serve musicians from all walks of life. And if you're looking for the perfect instrument to inspire your next musical masterpiece, we proudly carry the exquisite Bandleader line of trumpets and flugelhorns, as well as the superb Charlie Davis line of trumpets. What's more, Bob Reeves Brass is taking their commitment to your musical journey even further. We're now offering a carefully curated collection of top-notch products designed specifically for brass musicians. You'll find premium guard bags to protect your beloved instruments, a diverse range of mutes from renowned brands like Ulvain mutes, Yupon and Okura mutes from Japan, Trumcore mutes, Rayano, Clary Wood mutes, and Charlie Davis mutes, ensuring you have the perfect mute for every performance. But that's not all. We've also got you covered when it comes to essential maintenance supplies, with a hand-picked selection of valve oils, lubricants, and more to keep your instruments in tip-top shape. Bob Reeves Brass is truly your one-stop shop for everything you need to fuel your passion and create music that touches hearts and souls. So go ahead, let us help you elevate your sound to new heights. Don't wait another moment to elevate your musical journey with Bob Reeves Brass. Connect with us at bobreeves.com, shoot us an email at info@bobreeves.com, and keep up with the latest news on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter at Bob Reeves Brass. Embrace your passion for music and let Bob Reeves Brass be your partner in creating the extraordinary. I hope everyone's spring is going well. The weather's been beautiful out here in LA, and I guess if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, I hope your autumn is going well. We have a lot coming up. First off, next week, we will be heading to Europe for a mini tour. We're going to Stockholm, Sweden, and to the Netherlands. So if you're in and around those areas, I hope you'll come out and visit us. The first event will be at our dealer store, Brass Specialisten, in Stockholm, Sweden. That'll be on May 2nd in the afternoon. We'll be there with our mouthpieces. We'll be doing valve alignments. And if that's not enough, we'll have our good friend Lasse Lindgren there with his Ulvain mutes. And also to meet Lasse. Lasse is an amazing trumpet player and also previous guest on this podcast. But as you may or may not know, he revitalized the Ulvain mute brand. And so he will have those on display, and then we will be there again with the mouthpieces and valve alignments and consultations. So we're looking forward to visiting Brass Specialisten May 2nd in Stockholm, Sweden. It'll be our first time there, so it'll be great to visit. Next up, May 3rd and 4th, we will be in Margraten, Netherlands, visiting our dear friends at Bandleader Trumpets. It's been amazing that it's been 5 years since our last visit, and kind of difficult to think about that the last time we were there was the last time that Bob Reeves and Hugh Bandleader met. Of course, they both passed in the year or two after that, but Nonetheless, we are great to carry on both of those fine gentlemen's legacy during this visit and see Heidrun and Yannick and all the great folks at Van Laar. Again, that'll be May 3rd and 4th at the Van Laar factory in Margraten, Netherlands. And same thing, we will be doing valve alignments and have tons of mouthpieces to try and, of course, give consultations. Last but not least, our good friends in Rijswijk, Netherlands. I hope I pronounced that right. Up near Amsterdam, Marcel and Heiko at Atelier Pfeiffer. Our last visit there was 2013. So it's been 11 years, and we're so grateful that they are hosting us again. This will be on Monday, May 6th. I'll be there all day, mouthpieces, alignments, and just a great hang with those folks. Beautiful store there that they have, and so much history going back almost 100 years. So May 6th, Atelier Pfeiffer in Rijswijk, Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam. Hopefully you'll be able to join us at one of those events. For more information, you can always email us at info@bobreeves.com. A few weeks after that will be the International Trumpet Guild annual conference held this year in Anaheim, California, so just down the road from us. The dates for that, May 28th to June 1st. We will be doing valve alignments, of course, and if you want to prepay, save a little bit more on the valve alignment, and more importantly, secure your slot, you can do so by going to bobreeves.com/ITG. May 28th to June 1st, we will have hundreds of mouthpieces. We will be doing valve alignments there at our booth. We will have some of the Shire's trumpets. We will have some of the Van Laar trumpets. We will have Charlie Davis with his trumpets and mutes at our booth. Tom Clary from Clary Wood Mutes will be flying out and have a full selection of his mutes at our booth. As well as should just be getting a shipment of guard bags. So singles, doubles, and triples, and wheelies we will have at our booth. So if you're in the market for a new case, we will have guard bags and new G&L cases. Wonderful hard shell cases for single trumpet cases that we will have in stock. So that and all the other fun things we carry. So I hope you'll join us at the ITG conference, May 28th to June 1st. Then, a few weeks later, we'll be heading to the Pacific Northwest for the William Adam Trumpet Festival, this year held in Ellensburg, Washington at Central Washington University. Our great friend and customer up there and professor, John Harbaugh, is hosting this year, and really looks like it's going to be a killer lineup, as the William Adam Trumpet Festival is known to have. I don't think there's been a festival that hasn't had a killer lineup. I know this year Jerry Hay is giving a presentation, Larry Hall, I think Mr. Harbaugh is giving a presentation, as well as many, many others. Same deal. We'll be having doing valve alignments, having the mouthpieces, trumpets, as many cases and trumpets and mouthpieces as I can fit in my van to get up to Ellensburg, Washington. So hope to see you there. Of course, if you're interested in going to the conference, I highly recommend it. All the information for that is available at williamadamtrumpet.com. Well, hopefully I will see you in Europe or at ITG or at the Bill Adam Trumpet Festival. That's all the news for today. Now let's get right to my special guest, Clint Baker. Clint Baker is a seasoned band leader with over 40 years of experience in the music industry. Having traveled the world and shared his musical talents in both Europe and Asia, Clint has established himself as a versatile musician with a passion for jazz. Clint is currently deeply involved in music education and serves as the director of the prestigious Teagarden Jazz Camp held in Sly Park, California. His dedication to nurturing the next generation of musicians is evident in his work with aspiring talents at his esteemed jazz camp. In addition to his educational endeavors, Clint remains an active performer in the vibrant music scene of the Bay Area. He can be found collaborating with various groups such as Nick Rossi's Swing Band, Heidi Evelyn, the Hot Baked Goods, and Jessica King, where his musical prowess shines brightly. Clint's commitment to preserving the rich history of jazz is evident in his ongoing role as the instructor of the renowned jazz history symposium, Jazz from the Hill. Through his long-running program, he imparts his knowledge and passion for jazz to eager learners, ensuring the legacy of this beloved music genre endures for generations to come. And now, without further ado, here's my interview with Clint Baker. Well, here we are, 2 years in the making.
Yeah, at least, right?
Clint Baker, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, John.
Let's talk about trumpet and probably a few other instruments as well.
Yeah, well, that sort of goes with the territory with me, I guess.
So how did you start into me? Did you start with trumpet? How did you?
No, I did not start with trumpet. Actually, I came to it. Uh-huh. I found it.
Well, we all do.
But
we
it
come to trumpet.
Took me a long time, and I have some weird things about how I did it. So okay. I started off. So I failed at athletics when I was a child. The great hope in my household. I grew up in Mountain View, California, Silicon Valley area. I was born in 1971, and I was a big kid, strong-looking kid. So my father, who had been an athlete in school, who will be listening to this, so yeah, Dad, I know. He was a gifted athlete in high school, mm-hmm. and he was hoping I would carry on. And I went to kindergarten soccer, and failed at kindergarten soccer. I had no ability. I was big, I could run, but I couldn't apply it to anything. I have no competitiveness in me at all. I don't understand. I would stop and watch the planes fly over because we lived near Moffett Naval Air Station. So I would stop. I would literally be in the middle of a soccer game and a P-3 Orion would fly over and I'd stop and watch the plane. And the parents would be screaming at me, not just my parents, but every other parent. So quickly it was obvious I wasn't going to make it in athletics, which I'm glad we got that out of the way early. Good. And it was such a epic failure that it really made the point. Mm-hmm. So I languished for a few years doing the things you do when you're very young. I was a nerd, so I was into airplanes and cars. And my mother took pity on me one day and said, son, you might be good at music. So they had a thing called a musical aptitude test. Mm-hmm. So I took the musical aptitude test and did really well. And my mother's like, wow, you did really well in that. Maybe you should play in a band. So this is like third grade. It's like right before fourth. And they decided I should play clarinet. So I got a clarinet and put it together and went through the whole process of being a clarinet player for 6 months. And when I started fourth grade, my band director said, we don't need any more clarinet players. We need trombone players. You're tall, you have long arms, you should play the trombone. And he hands me a trombone and says, this is what you're playing now. There was no choice involved in any of this. It was like, this is what you're doing. So I picked up the trombone and I wasn't particularly good at it. And I was kind of into it, but I had a lot of things I was thinking about. I was I'm like fourth grader, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I go along and I play trombone for a couple of years, and eventually I get to junior high. And at this point, I learn about playing in a jazz band. Now, I had already been interested in music. The weird thing is, like, my parents don't play, but music's always been a part of my life. My father had a large record collection that skewed towards early rock and roll, but particularly rhythm, like 50s. The nexus between rock and roll and R&B and all that stuff in that milieu of music from the early 50s. So I heard a lot of Fats Domino when I was growing up, a lot of New Orleans-based music I didn't even know about, but I was steeped in it kind of without even knowing. So that was always around me. So I'd been listening to music, and I'd started getting, even at that young age, I'd started getting into swing music, and I wasn't interested in what kids were listening to. I was obviously interested in other stuff, other music. So I get the trombone, I start playing the trombone, I get to junior high, and I've been hearing swing music already. And also I was very close to my grandfathers, both my grandfathers, who were guys from the World War II generation. So they were steeped in swing music. So because of that, I got really interested in like Benny Goodman, Count Basie. Like I can remember very vividly Count Basie and Benny Goodman records as being my favorite when I was like that age, like a little kid. So I was really into that stuff. And I get to junior high, and all of a sudden I have this great band director named Linda Snyder. And she has this fantastic program at this place called Grand Middle School, which is blocks from my house. Astonishingly good music program. And she puts me in the beginning jazz band. And all of a sudden, there's a thing called a solo, where you can get up and play a solo, right? And I'd already been listening to swing, so I knew like how that worked. Like I knew that a guy would get up and he'd blow a chorus. I mean, I kind of already knew that as a kid, that was like free improvised music, but I never thought I could do it because I was in 4th grade and I was a kid. I get there in 7th, 6th grade. She's like, "Oh yeah, who wants to blow a solo?" And I'm not even thinking about it. No premeditation. Raise my hand. I'm in. Let me blow. I want to blow a solo. So that's how it starts.
Wow.
And from there on out, jazz became like my whole thing, right? The whole life. And so I played trombone, and then I picked up tuba. And actually through most of junior high and high school, I was I was a low brass specialist. And even in high school, in the band, I played sousaphone and tuba and bass trombone and tenor trombone. And I did all of that until I discovered the idea that I could start a traditional jazz band, like a New Orleans style jazz band. And I did it when I was 13 years old. So very quickly in junior high school, I went from being, I want to blow solo to I'm going to start a band. So I effectively been leading a band for 40 years at this point in my life. I'm only 53 and I'm not only 53. I feel like an old guy. So I've actually had a going band for 40 years.
Since you were 13 years old.
Yeah, and I've never disbanded it. There's always been something going on from youth bands to professional bands.
That's incredible. So the passion was so strong.
It was so strong.
And your parents supported this? Did they help you?
They didn't. They were bewildered.
Like, what happened to this kid?
You're right. That's exactly, it was totally like one of those deals where it was like, I went from just being like and I'm a pretty introverted kid, and I spent a lot of time on my own. I was young and a lot of time in my head. So I went from being kind of like that kid, like the wallflower, to all of a sudden like being, hey, I'm going to be a band leader, right? It was like, bam, like just like that, right? So I'm going along and I got this band. So then things start really kicking into high gear because now I want to play a very specific kind of music. So I want to play New Orleans jazz music. So I start learning about the music, reading everything I can get, books, any book I can get, which is crazy because I'm dyslexic. So the fact that I did all this when I was younger even amazes me at this point because I'm like, and in those days we didn't have the internet. This is like pre-internet, so you had to go to the library.
Yeah, listen to that, kids. We actually had to go through the card catalogs.
Yeah, I'm gonna
research.
I'm gonna do my get off my lawn thing. I had to read books. I had to check records out from the library, but I got super passionate about the music. And, basically like a lot of guys who get turned on to the music, it was Louis Armstrong that brought me in. I remember my parents were going to the Mountain View Public Library, buying, you don't buy from libraries, so borrowing these records. That's how crazy your brain gets. Borrowing these records, I remember putting on that Louis Armstrong Hot 7 record, those Hot 7s, and like hearing Armstrong play, like that is the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. I remember I listened to it it was an LP, and I just listened to one track over and over and over again. It's like, and it was for me, I was listening to it not just for Louis, but for the whole band because I wanted to have the band. So that was like the first moment when I got into thinking about trumpet. Because I mean, at that point, I hadn't thought about trumpet. I'd been thinking about it from a low brass player. In my original band, I was the tuba player, blah, blah, blah. And I was using kids on the trumpet chair. But I finally like, oh my gosh, that's the spark plug, right, of the whole thing. So Armstrong brought me into it. And so, but anyway, getting back to the business of what I was trying to do, I started collecting musical instruments for the kids for my kids, because I knew that I wanted things like banjos and like I wanted a cornet for my trumpet player. I didn't want him playing trumpet, all that kind of stuff, because I wanted to differentiate it from what we were getting fed in the mid 80s, right?
Like jazz band.
Yeah, Maynard Ferguson, all that kind of stuff, and like real heavy into that, and like Conky, all that stuff, that mid 80s, Maynard was like the king of the whole thing, and all of the chameleon. Everybody, I was going like the opposite direction. Like I'm going to do this other thing. So I was doing everything good to differentiate. So I had a tuba player. So I decided, and I bought drum equipment. So I was actually going out. My grandfather, my mom's dad, had been in the Navy, and he was a real lover of music. In fact, he introduced me to the Mills Brothers when I was a kid, and like a lot of things that were really cool from his generation. And he and I were real close, and we used to go to flea market all the time. So we went out to the flea market and I started buying instruments. And I remember the day I got a cornet. So this is how this whole thing starts. So one day I had $40 in my pocket. I'd saved up $40. I go out to the flea market and I find a cornet for $40. And I'm thinking this was meant to be. Here's the $40. It was an old Holton that was it leaked like crazy. But it hit my price point, right? Yeah. $40. So I go and get the $40 cornet, take it home, and I start fiddling around with it. But I sounded terrible on it. I was pretty good on the trombone and the tuba, but I could not get my sound was terrible. And so, but then I was so busy doing other things, I didn't really think about it much. It's like, but I think I'm going to file this away and maybe come back to it. So then skipping forward midway through high school, I've now had a pretty successful youth band, and we get invited to play at the big jazz festival at Sacramento. And I'm like a junior in high school. At this point, I had two trumpet players. We were playing a book that had two trumpets and trombone and usual traditional jazz instrumentation, clarinet, rhythm section. Well, one of my trumpet players was a part-time trumpet player and was a professional musician at that point. I actually encouraged some younger professionals to come play with me. And my main trumpet player got called up to this professional band. So I didn't have a trumpet player. So I'm a few months from, like 4 months from the festival, and I have no trumpet player. So then it's like, okay, you got to do it. So at this point, I had moved on to a King Master Model cornet that still came from the flea market. Went out and got the biggest mouthpiece I could, like a 1.5C. And at that point, you could go buy at the music store. And so I put it in there, and I just took the cornet everywhere with me and practiced and practiced and practiced. Like my mom I'd go to my mom at the grocery store. I'd have the cornet in the car, pick it up, play. Anytime I kept the thing on my face because I knew that I needed to keep it on my face. My tone started getting better slowly. So that's kind of how trumpet found me, was like through necessity.
Yeah.
Right.
Hearing Louis Armstrong, hearing that sound. You call it the spark plug.
Well, yeah.
A trumpet player bailing because he got another gig.
Right, exactly.
This
is all in high school, right?
I mean, I was like collecting baseball cards and hanging out at the mall, and you were, picking up instruments at a flea market and getting a band together.
Well, you make it sound like I wasn't crazy. That's the part that you got to understand. I was pretty crazy. I mean, I was fueled with a lot of enthusiasm.
So, I mean, how hard was it to get other kids your age to play banjo or play?
It wasn't as hard as you would think, but the problem was that everybody's so busy. Even in those days, in the 80s, even though it wasn't like it is now.
And you didn't have cell phones. You have to go and knock on people's doors.
We had a band practice at my house. My mom and we rehearsed at the house every Wednesday night. We had a band practice, and so everybody just came, and then more kids came. So I actually had sort of more kids involved, but I was not in the positions that I needed, like clarinet players, and it was hard. But the trumpet thing. But as the band got better really quickly, and like I said, then we got to the point where like even in that time the engagements were getting a higher level. So then that's when I had to do this thing. And so I learned to play trumpet, and then found out that I really liked it. And one of the reasons why I liked playing the trumpet was one, that the music I was into, the old time jazz music, there was a great lineage of trumpet players. Armstrong was only one of this lineage of guys who go back to Freddie Keppert, way back. And I got really intrigued by that whole thing, the whole world that was, and the whole world of New Orleans jazz, really just totally, and it was something that was weird and off the path. Most of my band directors from there on out thought I was completely insane. and were a little frightened of me because I was so monomaniacal in this thing I wanted to do. And so, but I found out, I played that first festival on trumpet, and I realized that I had all of the power in the band. Like it changed the whole way I ran the band. Because before that, right before that, I'd been playing banjo, and I rehearsed the band from the banjo chair, but I was rehearsing trumpet players. But then I realized if I played trumpet myself, I could have my own idea of how I wanted the songs to go, and I could lead the band from that instrument. So quickly, I revamped my whole band to be from a band that was heavily involved in reading music to a band that didn't read music, because I could then dictate what I wanted from the trumpet position.
Interesting.
And so I started, at that point, I'm playing on an old Conqueror cornet that I got at the flea market. So check this setup out. It was a small bore Conqueror, which is really small, like maybe 430 range bore, but with a 1.5C mouthpiece. So you can imagine what that sounds blatty as all get out. But it was, actually, I didn't realize it actually probably balanced out pretty well because of the big mouthpiece. But But anyway.
We'll get into that.
But anyway, It was really interesting. So I did that for a while, and then my band progressively got better. And by the end of high school, I had started a professional band, like a band that was a mix of some young guys and older guys. And at this point, I started thinking I was going to switch to trumpet, because I felt like, Armstrong played trumpet, but I was having a hard time deciding like what direction to go. So there was there's an antique store on the peninsula where I grew up, one of the antique dealers had started selling brass instruments, particularly brass instruments, as part of her thing. So she started getting these really pretty good instruments in, and she had a Selmer trumpet. And I was like, Armstrong played a Selmer trumpet. Harry James played a Selmer trumpet. I'm going to play a Selmer trumpet. So I figured out a way to finagle getting this trumpet from her through money and trading her stuff. And so I started playing a Selmer trumpet like when I was 1990. That's when I remember, it was 1990. And it turns out the best part was, you'll love this. Turns out we were very successful. The band, we went to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in 1992. And I was just 21 years old at that point. And the best part was I played the horn, and after the gig, we had this triumphant gig. Thousands of people were there. They loved the band. The band was brought there by the guys in Preservation Hall. They sponsored our trip down. They thought of so much of the band. We did this incredible set, standing ovation after every tune. It was an amazing experience. But I go back to the hotel the next day, take the horn out, and the horn doesn't play. Turns out there was a pinhole in the ferrule between the bell and the valve section. Oh, no. But my hand covered it. Yeah. My meat paw covered it. So the meat paw covered. So then I didn't even know it was an issue until I took it to the hotel, and all of a sudden it's squirting water out of this hole. It's like, man, that's some seriously hilarious. That was hilarious.
That was lucky too.
That I didn't notice it, and I'd probably been doing it for months, right? All my preparations to get the band ready for the festival, and I get done. It's like, why is this
worn through that spot?
It worn through, yeah. It was like a literal pinhole.
So, I mean, how did you get your band to a spot where you were getting invited to go to the New Orleans Jazz Festival?
I honestly don't even fully understand. We were just worked hard, and I got enough kids interested in listening to records, because I mean that's the way you do it in jazz. I mean, you have to listen to the music. All this other stuff that we do is fine, but jazz is all about listening and understanding the lineage, right? And I don't know. I think I had enough. I think I had been working at it for so long. I had enough gigs to where the kids saw that there was a little bit. I mean, we're talking about teenagers, so their options are like working as pizza delivery guys or something else, menial work, right? And I could offer them gigs so they could come and make $100. By that time, we were doing pretty well. I mean, we could $7,500 in high school money. That's great, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the problem is the pay scale hasn't really changed that much over the years, but that's another topic for another time.
Yeah,
But no, I think I was able to give enough work And I think I probably sold them on the idea that we could do something great together. Because, musicians, generally speaking, people really want to, we want to work together and do good things if there's an impetus to do it. Right?
Yeah.
And I think I had enough of impetus to get everybody involved. And the band got very good, and we had work. And we had I actually got the band a regular job in 1990, and we were still doing the regular job. We started at this place called Cafe Baroni in Menlo Park. It's a coffee house. We started playing there in October 1990, and we're still playing there after all these years. The place is still in business, and we're still playing there.
That's incredible.
We don't play there as much as we used to. We used to play every week, but now we play a season bi-weekly, but that's fine. It works great. But I mean, I think I had that, and then that's where the band got good. It's because the band had a regular job, and we were playing every week, and the band kept getting better, and then we got attention, and some of the guys in Preservation Hall heard us, and they were like, this band's amazing, we need to bring them to New Orleans. And so we got the call to do it. And it was an amazing experience to go down there. And play that. And we're all chill. I mean, I was not the oldest guy in the band, but pretty close, I was a 21-year-old band leader with guys who were in their teens.
Jeez. Going down to New Orleans. What could go wrong?
Oh, well, we actually, fortunately, it worked out fine. Yeah. Fortunately, we had enough support. Like my mom and dad were very supportive and helped, and we had a good support team.
That's awesome. Did you get to meet the guys in the Preservation Hall?
Oh my gosh, I sure did, dude. I remember we got to play a party. But New Orleans is a really interesting place. People are really kind there and really, really open. So we got to do after the festival, we got invited to play a lunchtime party at Frank DeMond's place, who was a longtime member of the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. And he had a place right across from Rampart Street. So right near where Armstrong Park is. And he invited us over, and it was celebrating the death day of a famous musician. And he was able to muster all these guys. So my band's playing, and like one of my favorite trumpet players of all time, not a well-known person, but a guy from New Orleans named Percy Humphrey, who played with Preservation Hall for years, was at the party. And he basically like anointed me that day. Oh. He sat and watched the band for 45 minutes. And actually I had him come up and sing a tune with the band, because he sang the old song, Bucket's Got a Hole in It. He came up and he sang with us. And he said, he basically said, he told me that I played good. And at that point I was like, this is a guy who was born in 1903, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he had been around. And his brother Willie, who was a clarinetist who had worked with Henry Red Allen, and he also was a Preservation Hall guy. He was at the party, and so it was one of those days, it was magical time for us, right? Yeah. But I felt like at that point that solidified my mission, particularly as a trumpet player at that point. So, I mean, I still played all the other instruments, which all of my teachers thought was insane, because I was in school studying bass trombone and tuba pretty seriously, and playing tenor trombone, but working on trumpet.
How funny. So
my trombone teacher was like, I don't know, what are you doing? Because that was that thing in that era. Like nowadays, it's in vogue to play multiple instruments, but in those days, it was all about specialties. They were training us to be studio musicians.
Yeah. But
the problem is, like, that didn't really pan out, because studio musicians down here in Los Angeles, they still work, but there's no studio work in the Bay. I got in on a little bit of that kind of stuff later in the 90s, but it's all the whole panorama has changed, as you guys know, because I'm a big fan of the podcast. As you know, I've been listening since episode 1. Yeah.
So I was going to follow up. So, I mean, during all this time through your high school and then college, were you taking any kind of private instruction?
I had trombone instruction.
Okay.
I was taking trombone lessons from a guy who played with Maynard's band, a guy named Chris Brayman, who worked in the late 80s with Maynard's band. And he was a good trombone teacher, but he also was just completely flummoxed by my whole deal. He didn't understand the whole thing about the trumpet and the multiple instrument thing, because they never wanted you to be the best you could. But I was just not gonna conform. I've never really had trumpet lessons. I did have some instruction, but it's very minimal. It finally all kind of caught up with me later. which we wanted to get into, but
yeah, interesting. So self-taught, but brass principles, but you take.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty well. My trombone basis was pretty good, so I was able. So I took the principles that I learned from my trombone study and applied them to trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
So what was interesting is that means that like when I work on any kind of routine, it's mostly trombone based stuff. So I do melodic etudes. Like the Rochu, the trombone, if I go to anything, that's what I go to.
Interesting.
So I don't, because the whole thing is the music I play is not technical. I mean, I'm not deceiving myself and thinking I'm going to become some kind of like, studio, I can play anything on trumpet guy. I'm not that guy, right? But I work with the Rochus because that dovetails well with my style of playing, which is melodic. It's a melodic style, and you want to be, it's a vocal based style of playing. More, I think of myself more as an opera singer who plays trumpet, or a singer than as like a trumpet player who's going to be playing Clark, like the Arbin and stuff and Clark studies. I can play some Arbins. But honestly, what happens is if I start working through Arbins, my chops fall apart because because of the way I've oriented. I can do a little bit of that kind of work, but I can't do mostly. I want to be working on melodic type stuff and interpreting melody and that kind of thing.
Interesting. So when you were a young kid getting out the cornet, then so you were just playing through tunes, stuff you heard. Were you playing along with records,
yes,
that sort of stuff?
And if I wanted to really work on my fundamentals, I'd get the Rochu out. And I'd play from Rochu, or I'd play scales. I actually have I have my practice thing kind of divided into a couple of things. Like I have my practice time. I kind of practice. I'm a all day practicer. I don't have a time that I practice, but I work through the day, pick the horn up, pick up, play, stop. So I'll have different things I do. Like I have one thing I just call maintenance, and I can do that watching TV or something where I practice scales and fingerings and stuff. And I do that a lot. And then, or if I need to work on tunes, I have a part of the day I work on material. And then if I'm feeling extra good, then I'll get the method books out and I'll start working on some things, that I know. I don't really push the envelope on that stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty basic.
With flexibility, things like that, tonguing.
Yeah, exactly. And the tonguing stuff, one of the things about old time jazz is that the attack is really different than a lot of things in modern jazz. I mean, I attack very hard. It's almost like pop attack, right? It's like, it's a very strong articulation is very important in this kind of music because the music, particularly in its oldest form, is very rhythmic music and everybody plays rhythmically. So and if you listen to Armstrong and in the older generation guys before Armstrong, they all have a very strong, hard attack a lot of times.
Interesting.
And so that's something I've worked on a lot. And it's actually hard because what happens is that sometimes in my playing career, my attack has gotten in the way of my ability to it's just so hard that I've actually had to work back from a point of like being so hard that it affects my ability to the airflow and everything. Like it can be too much. So like in recent years, I've figured out a way not to do it so hard and still get the pop, but I almost it's like a pop, right? Like if I hit it's almost like a marcato, right? With a TP over it. I would say that's sort of my normal attack on a quarter note or something like that. It's very, very hard. And so that also messed me up too. And that's the reason why it kind of caught up with me later,
So we have folks listening, young players that are probably getting classical instruction. They're playing their excerpts, or if they are jazz players, they're studying Freddie Hubbard and Miles and stuff like that. So if they want to get into more of the New Orleans style of traditional jazz.
Oh, it's really easy to do now because the internet, basically everything is available. I would start with Louis Armstrong's Hot 5 and Hot 7 records. But anything Armstrong does, Armstrong was very true to his musical roots all of his career. So you can learn a lot from hearing Armstrong at any time, particularly about the attack, about all of the phrasing, which is different than modern jazz phrasing. The vocabulary harmonically is different. It's much more based on scales and arpeggios, and using those tools, like the basic tools to make melodies. If you're improvising, if you're playing tunes, you got to learn tunes. So learning tunes is that's a big part of what we do. One of the reasons why I work in the Bay Area and around, and I've traveled around the world, is just because I know hundreds of songs. Mark Caparone was talking about that too.
Yeah, we should have a like name that tune or something with you guys. Or
well, I mean, it depends on what era, but
spin the wheel.
If you give me any kind of thing in the swing era, the 20s, 30s, I'm pretty good. I know hundreds of songs, and that's how I do it. So my whole playing style is not really based on a lot of the main principles of trumpet playing. It's more of like my technique comes to where I need it to be, right? So that's kind of how I do that.
Any secrets to learning a tune?
Not particularly. I find that you have to listen to things over and over again. But if you play, here's the thing: if you play enough tunes, you start seeing the similarities. So there are phrases and things that are kind of stock in pop songs that kind of help. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, there's that motif in this song, or it's a variation on a motif from another tune. That's how that's kind of like the shorthand of it. But also knowing, basically the way I learn a tune is the melody, and then I also try to tackle the chord structure. So I'll actually arpeggiate things if I need to kind of get that going.
And my wife yells at me about this. After you know so many tunes and the similarities, you ever start a tune and then end up in another tune?
Oh yeah,
okay.
It happens. Not that often. Fortunately, I'm disciplined enough not, but it definitely happens. It's the great where am I, and what am I doing situation. I'm on a gig and like, what did I do? What? Well, I always have a dialogue with myself when I'm playing anyway. There's, it's always like I'm always talking myself through it. It's like. That's probably weird and not the greatest way to do it, but that's just how I intuit, right? It's like, why did you do that? It's the dude, as they call it. It's the dude. The dude's in there,
I just told my wife I'm remixing. I'm doing a remix. I'm doing a mashup. As the kids
mashup, exactly. The kid, yes, exactly. That's what the kids talk about for sure.
I want to jump back to your career because where we left off, you did the New Orleans jazz, obviously a high point, especially for a 21-year-old. What were you still going through college at that point?
Well, I didn't do well in college. I went to college for a long time, but did not excel. Because I was in all the bands. I mean, I played the programs were strong in where I grew up. So I was in college, but I was a bass trombone player, and I was playing tuba in the concert band, bass trombone in the jazz band, and I was playing. And then we got another director in the college, and I went to Foothill College, and director shifted halfway, and then he put me on lead trombone, and I was splitting lead with another guy and playing first and second, and I'd been playing bass trombone all the way up to that point. But he wanted me to solo because I was a pretty good soloist. So he wanted to put me in a position because soloing bass trombone is not easy. At one point, I was taking a tenor and a bass to my rehearsals because if I'd blow a solo, because I was sometimes the only guy in the section who would want to do that. So I'd have a tenor and I'd have like all this equipment I was lugging. But since I'd been a band leader, it wasn't that big of a deal to me. So eventually he put me on but I found that difficult because my reading ability at its best has never been like stellar. There's something about the dyslexic part of my brain that has a hard time reading things note for note. So I kind of eventually I was fine for a long time because I was doing it so much. So to give you a sense of what was going on, I was successful band leader playing trumpet in my own band. I was playing in the concert and jazz bands on trombone and then playing tuba in the symphonic band. And this went on until like 1994 when I finally decided I was done with school because I wasn't doing well. I did okay in music stuff, but everything, I didn't want to do anything but music. So yeah, I eventually just left.
Yeah. And so the trombone degree, where you were doing trombone performance
Yeah,
was your...
that was where I was going. But I just dropped it. I abandoned the whole thing because I was working a lot. And I also had picked up the string bass at that point, and guitar and banjo and drums I was playing on gigs. So I was working as a professional musician. So it was like I was already had a career. I didn't need to go to school to have a career. But my passion was trumpet and playing in my own band and trying to make headway that way, and I was doing okay for myself with my very, very, very poor technique. I was still getting called.
And still using a 1.5C cornet.
I think I think one of the great moments. So I've had these great steps in my trumpet playing career with mouthpieces. So the first play 1.5C and I stopped, and eventually I went to a friend's place. He had old stock mouthpieces. He had owned a music store, so he had a bunch of mouthpieces. So one day I walk in and I said, "Can I try some trumpet mouthpieces?" And I found a 7DW, an old box 7DW, and I put that on my face, and that was a game changer. At this point, I'm like, this is what I need. I need a thick rim and a medium cup. But that changed everything because endurance. So the whole thing, John, about traditional jazz is endurance. The gigs are brutal. There's a lot of playing on them. So it is to me, the most important aspect of playing. So everything works towards the goal of endurance. 5 hour, can you play a 5-hour job? So it's not a high note gig. It's not a gig where you've got to play like super technical stuff. It's really like, can you get from downbeat to like the longest gigs I've ever played were 5 hours and not just be completely destroyed.
Just thrashed. Yeah.
So everything I've ever done was in service to endurance. That's the first thing for me. So that's why when I started discovering thicker rims and going that direction, that it was a lifesaver for me and also because my technique was so bad in those days, I played with way too much pressure. So the thicker rim helped me distribute the pressure a little better. So it gave me kind of a boost anyway because of my poor technique. So, but yeah, it was all about endurance. Yeah. And the horn choices, everything was just, how can I get from downbeat to the end, without bleeding?
This is the question we get all the time. When you move to a thicker rim, we get this question here at the shop. When you move to a thicker rim, did you have a harder time articulating?
Probably if I was normal, I would have, but because of the way I articulate, there was an adjustment, but it was quickly overridden by the fact that it helped me. So I made the adjustment.
Yeah, you make an adjustment and it.
I have to tell you about playing wise, the way I look at playing is the equipment is secondary. As much as I love horns, we were just talking about that, and I've owned horns. I love horns, but I've learned that the sound is in my head. So no matter what equipment I'm playing, I might deceive myself into thinking it's going to sound better. But ultimately, within 2 weeks, I'm back to sounding like me no matter what I'm doing. So this is a great superpower for me, because then I can make equipment decisions just based on what I need to accomplish the thing, the endurance. So the instrument and the mouthpiece become a tool to make a sound for me, as opposed, because the sound's in my head. So I just adjust the equipment. And I've learned a lot from your podcast, because I've listened to every one and how everybody has a different approach. But I love how you guys talk about, we take care of the mouthpiece. So you don't have to think about it. The music, you make the music. That rings totally true with me, because that's the way I do it. So I have I have a split mind. I do have a mind for analyzing equipment and stuff, but I've found over the years that it doesn't matter what I play. I end up sounding like me. Yeah. And so the mouthpiece, so I can play on a mouthpiece that might be unorthodox slightly for what I do, I don't know, maybe we're unorthodox to some, but it's shallow. I play a shallow mouthpiece with a thick rim. And if I were playing on a 1.5C, I'd still sound like me. It wouldn't matter, but it makes it easier for me.
Yeah.
And the horn too. So the combination of the mouthpiece and the horn really works. So I can have the ease of playing, and efficiencies become really important to me. And also, like I say, we were talking about balancing resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the principles that I kind of work towards as a trumpet player.
Yeah. And you mentioned trumpet, but we're talking primarily cornet, or what's your
Well,
mix
initially
up
that
with
was
cornet and
true.
trumpet?
Now, I was obsessed with cornet when I was younger. And even to this day, I have cornets.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually a small collection of them that I use. They're all basically, my thing about horns too is that since everything's changes, I have a stable of horns and I will play different horns on different gigs depending how I'm feeling. And cornets like that too. Sometimes I feel like playing cornets, so I'll take my cornet out.
Mm-hmm.
But I played cornet pretty much. So my sonic vision of trumpet playing started with cornet.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still, I think of myself as being a cornet based player because that's what I played initially. That's the sound. I think, other than Armstrong, that's the sound that attracted me to the instrument. And I still have cornets and play them. I have Schilkes and I have two Schilkes and they're so good. They're such well-made instruments and they're in tune. Because one of the reasons why I switched to trumpet is I got tired of the pin the tail on the donkey nature of cornet intonation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I trumpet was a lot more in tune. And so now, fortunately, with the Schilkes, they're in tune.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to get to that place, let me tell you. Playing sharp, when you ever played a high note, like on a cornet, a lot of cornets I played, they were like super sharp.
Mm-hmm.
When you started playing high, and I got really frustrated with that. So that's part of the reason why I switched to trumpet too, was just stable. Stability is also important. And I also find that over the years, I've stuck with my Bob Reeves mouthpiece because it's stable in a way that other brands I've tried, like Marcinkowitz and stuff, they're just not stable.
Mm-hmm.
For me. This is all for me, like pitch wise. There's something about the Reeves mouthpiece that everything lines up really well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really noticeable,
Yeah. What would you say your mix is of trumpet and cornet?
It used to be 50-50, but lately it's been more like 70-30.
Mm-hmm.
I've been liking playing trumpet lately, but there are times when I go, when I want to play cornet, and I don't think I sound that different on the two instruments, and I don't make the concession mouthpiece wise. I just use the same mouthpiece for the cornet, so it's not that difference. One of the advantages, you can hear yourself better on the cornet. It's shorter, and particularly since I like the response, and sometimes it just seems like the thing to do on the job, or if it's a small venue or a small group, I'll take the cornet instead of the trumpet. But like I say, it's the mix is not like it. It's not 50-50. It's more trumpet heavy these days.
Now, this might be a naive question, but that's okay because I'm a stuffy trumpet player.
No, it's okay, man. No such thing.
I mean, for someone you've spent your whole career playing, New Orleans traditional style jazz, so you're handcuffed in a way in terms of the style, the notes you can play, that sort of thing. How do you in that realm still define yourself? Have your thumbprint.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, I don't think of it as being handcuffed. I feel like I have so much freedom within this world of playing. I feel like all of my career that I've always just been trying to play the best chorus I can on the next tune. And my harmonic vocabulary, you have a lot more leeway than you think just within that realm. And all of the musicians I like all were pushing the boundaries as far as they could within this idiom of music. But I'm kind of shackled to it because I like the rhythm feel better than modern jazz, honestly. I like swing style rhythm better. I like the 4/4, straight 4/4 rhythm. And I feel like if I have a good straight 4/4 rhythm going behind me, I can do anything. Like I can play anything I want. I can play the weirdest stuff you ever heard. And I take a lot of inspiration from Henry Red Allen, who was a contemporary of Armstrong's, but he was one of the freest trumpet players you ever heard play. He's totally free in his style. In fact, Don Ellis said one time that he thought everybody should check out. This is in New York in the 60s. Don Ellis. He said everybody should check Henry Red Allen out because he's the best avant-garde trumpet player there is playing in the city, right? He was convinced that Red Allen. So it's funny, you take those principles, somewhat simple principles, and you can run free with them. You can go a lot of places because maybe it's maybe too much freedom for me would make me would be too much for me, right? Like I like going in that idiom and just doing my thing, right? And talk about sound imprint. I spend most of my time working on tone and sound. I don't, and because that's the thing that has been hammered into me all of the years, all the studies I did of the music. It's all of the old musicians who were from New Orleans said the most important thing is to have your own individual sound. So if somebody comes up to me and says, I recognized your playing instantly without seeing you, which people have, I'm like, that is like the whole point.
You've done your job.
I've done my job, because that's what the old guys were saying. Every one of them to in their interviews. The Tulane Archives in New Orleans did a tremendously long interview series with all these great guys, and every one of these musicians said, you have to have your own sound print. And so that's what I work on. That I kind of work on my own thing all the time, my own sound all the time.
And what does that look like? Is it you doing long tones? Are you recording yourself?
Long tones, recording. I do a lot of recording of myself. Long tones are really, really important. And I don't do them as much as I should, like everybody. But the long tones, also vibrato is super important in the kind of music I play. So I've worked hard at not having a vibrato that's constant, but something I can color or control. So I actually work on that. Like I'll start with a pure tone, and I like it. It's like a flavor. Vibrato is like, when you make gumbo, this is a stupid analogy. You make gumbo, you put the flavor in, right? So here's the gumbo is the base, and then you flavor it. So my tone is the base, and then I flavor it with vibrato. And that vibrato can be different depending on the tune or the kind of style of song we're playing. If I'm doing more of a swing, like a Harry James type thing, I'll change it. If I'm doing a really old-fashioned New Orleans thing, it'll be really fast and wide. If I'm doing an Armstrong thing, that's a little different, But I don't copy any of these players. Like I'm not a transcription guy. Like I don't do transcriptions. I just learn by ear. I just picked up things by ear. So I just think of it as I'm doing my own thing in this idiom of music. And I don't, and I've played long enough to where I feel like I have a voice and I can do that,
And let's talk about the nuts and bolts of running a band.
Oh,
you said you were an introvert too. Like,
it's very strange.
Did you have to overcome a lot of that?
Oh yeah, I had to actually teach myself how to do a lot of the stuff that's a band leader that people think are natural. Like I had to learn to talk to audiences. I had to learn to be a big figure on stage. None of that stuff comes naturally to me, so I had to learn it. And I learned it from watching and studying other people who were doing it and picking things up and trying to figure out how to navigate through all of it. And then just running the band is hard because you're dealing with a bunch of people and you have to keep them, stimulated, inspired, but also make sure they show up on time, right? And I like playing music with my friends. So most all the people I work with I'm close to, and I like that relationship, the camaraderie of that. And I've been lucky because I've been doing it for so long. I've cultivated a pretty good stable of musician friends. So that's kind of the way I do it. And just, showing up and not being afraid to work, like set up the PA, help with the drum set. That's the secret to success, is that you have to just not be afraid to get in there and get your hands dirty. Be involved in all the different aspects of it. And then the music too,
Dive in and do it.
Diving in and doing it is exactly the thing.
Yeah. And what about, the hustling for gigs, that side of things?
I'm not very good at it. I'm not good at it at all, but I've been around long enough to where I get work. I'm not as busy as I used to be. I had a very major health incident a few years ago. And, that changed my outlook on things.
How so?
Well, I'm not pursuing as much of my own band work, but I still, because I've been around a long time, I get called. We're real busy in the Bay Area, there's a real strong swing dance community, and I've been involved in that swing dance community as a band leader since the very beginning of that scene, so 2005-ish, where that scene really took off. And so I'm kind of a founding member of that world. So I still get work, but I don't hustle work like I used to because I can't, it's not as easy to do. And I never was that good at it in the first place. But I'm fortunate I have enough people who believe in what I do and what the band does to where I can continue to have that.
The calls keep coming.
Yeah, I get calls, and then I work a lot as a sideman. So in fact, I'm much happier, honestly, anymore being a sideman. And I do get a lot of work. I mean, I work a lot more than East Friday, particularly after the pandemic killed all of us, just to come back and have as much as I have, and considering that I have some physical limitations, I have to consider it's pretty good these days.
So even through the pandemic with everything shut down?
Oh, it was bad in the pandemic. There was no work. And there was whole months, there was like 2 months where I didn't even play. It was so frustrating.
Yeah. But you made it through.
I made it through, and I kept working, and I kept practicing, and then I eventually got back into practicing a lot, and then the gigs came back big time,
Yeah. People want to hear live music.
It seems as though that's the case.
It's amazing. It's almost like it's been happening for millennia.
I know. It's crazy. And it's really lately been kind of nuts.
The other thing I want to pick your brain about, and I forgot if I did this with Mark, is talking about like the other skills in playing, especially on the cornet, like especially in the period music, like the mutes.
I have a mute bag. I have a large mute bag. Yeah. And I'm always looking for vintage mutes or vintage like mutes that sound good. Lately, there's been a real renaissance in some really cool reissues of old mutes, like Trumcore. Is that the name you use?
Yeah, Trumcore.
They make some pretty. I just bought a mute from them that was pretty interesting. It's like an old Shastok mute from the 20s. And they call them all these sexy names, but they're basically just these old reissues of these mutes. And also that guy, the guy 3D prints, Huber, I think it's Frank or something like that in New York. So I bought a lot of those. Plus I've been collecting. I'm a big fan of case candy. So over the years, anytime I could pick up most of the mutes that I got for years were out of cases, like mouthpieces. I have a huge collection of mouthpieces that I don't play, but I keep them because I've got some really cool stuff because things just come out of the cases, right?
I love it. That's a great term for it.
Yeah. And so like I most of my mute collection started with case candy. And it just so happened that my sonically I was hearing older style mutes, so I have some pretty cool stuff that I carry. And then I have like a drawer. I have 2 drawers full of mutes at my home. I have trumpet mutes and trombone mutes, and they have drawers, and I have like 50 mutes in each one of those, and I cycle them through. There's some things that are harder to get than other things, and now mutes are expensive. But when I was coming up, nobody cared about mutes.
Yeah.
It was like, if it's not a Humsenberg cup mute or straight mute, nobody was like, what is this?
That's the next wave. It's crazy. The last conference we were at, the number of mute makers now, I think might have surpassed mouthpiece makers.
I know.
That was the wave 20 years ago. It's incredible.
It's completely insane to me. I feel like I'm like ahead of the curve on all this stuff by being not ahead of the curve,
But what's your go-to? Like if you're on a gig, like what do you have in your bag?
Oh, okay. That's simple. I have I always carry a Con doorknob mute. Mark talked about those. And I always have one of those. And there's a couple of variations. I have 2 variations of those that are original from the teens. I always have a cup mute, but my taste in cup mutes varies. I literally have different sonically different times. Like I have I bought a cup mute from you, the Swedish maker.
Yeah, the Olvens.
Yeah, I have one of those, and I use that sometimes. I also have a bunch. I have a mini Shastoks, the old style Shastoks, and in various states of repair and modification. And then I also, lately I've been just using the good old Humsenberg mica mute, with the corks sanded down pretty significantly. And I use that. And I always have a solo tone mute. And I have a really good one of those, Shastok, that my good friend Larry Souza modified. He actually took a bigger tube, and where the tube is for the megaphone. He actually enlarged the tube, and it greatly enhanced the mute's openness.
Yeah.
And volume.
Because those solo tones are funky.
Yeah, and particularly the Humes and Berg ones. This one he did great. And then I always have a plunger. I usually carry a rubber plunger. I've been using the what is it? That one, the Kenny Rampton one.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And then I also have a Billy Butterfield plunger, which is basically like a coconut shell made out of aluminum.
Oh, cool. And
I use that a lot. And I have a derby with me at all times. And I also have a beret that I stick over my bell. So, and I use and then I usually have some other, what I call a special use mute. So it's either like lately I've been using this drum corps mute. I don't know what they call it. He's got these fanciful names for these mutes. Like in the Enigma or something like that. I've got one of those. I always have one of those with me. Yeah. And I always carry them around. I carry them in a Carhartt work bag, and that's the way. And I do this. I don't have as many for trombone. That's my go-to. So I always have a mute bag with me. Yeah. On my gigs, I have a stand, so I set them all up and work from them. And use a lot of them. A lot of the gigs I play.
Do you work the mutes and the plungers and stuff into your practicing?
I do. I work on mute intonation some with my tuner. I don't really work with the plunger so much, but I work with the other mutes because they're all weird. They're all intonation-wise, they're all wacky, and it's hard. The doorbell mutes are the doorknob mute. Sorry, doorbell, doorknob.
That'll be next week. We'll have the doorbell mute.
Doorbell. The doorknob mute is really weird because it basically, they were designed as practice mutes for Con. So when Con would ship their horns back in the teens and aughts, this is the 20th century, folks, not the 21st century. This is important. I'm very much a child of the 20th century. They would ship these doorknob mutes and as practice mutes, so they weren't really designed to be used. So if you want to use them, you have to build the cork up on them. But often I'll hold mine in the bell and use my three left fingers, my middle finger to my pinky, and I'll use that to make the wah-wah.
Interesting.
Which is a technique that was very popular in the 20s. And King Oliver, Joe Oliver, the Louis Armstrong's mentor, was a proponent of that style where he would use the mute in the bell with his fingers to make the wah-wah. And that's a technique that is not many people know these days, but I do it a lot. Mark does it. There's a few of us who do it.
Yeah, and that's with the con mute.
Yeah, with the con mute. It's got to be a small, but they also make, like the Pixie mute that Humes and Berg mute works pretty well. It's basically a copy of one of those. And that's actually there is a pro tip for you. If you're getting an old time jazz and you can't find a con doorknob, just go get a Pixie mute from, and file the corks down a lot, and you can it's the same basic mute.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I put a Pixie in my gig bag lately because sometimes I feel bad about taking my con mutes out because I don't want them to I want to leave them on the gig,
You can't, it's not like you just pick one of those.
No, exactly. So I mix, and also, and there's other mutes you can use for that, but basically those old style straight mutes work really well for that if you want to do that.
Cool. Yeah. Mute freaks. I got my buddy, Noah Gladstone.
I
got
him
from the trombone corner. We should get you on the trombone corner next. I got him a t-shirt that says, "Kiss me, I'm a mute freak."
Yeah, no, I need one of those shirts too. I've been collecting those for years, and like I say, I've got a lot of mutes. It's but I feel like I use, and like I'm just always like sonically thinking, well, I'm, sometimes I'll switch cut mutes between jobs. I think I'll go back to the Shastok. Because it's whatever my ear is wanting to do at any particular time.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate how intentional you are, because so many trumpet players are guilty with either never practicing with your mute and, showing up to a pit orchestra or a jazz band.
You got to watch that with those solitone mutes, because
Yeah,
those things will mess you up fast.
Yeah, they're not plug and play.
No, they're not.
And also the fact you talk about filing the corks or extending the corks, like you need to fit the mute to your bell.
Yeah,
they don't just come from the factory, pre-tuned or pre-fit.
No, they don't, not at all. And also, like with me, I'm a big advocate. I really love the old non-Perel trumpet mutes.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed, one of the things I noticed in my research of watching videos and films is that that's what everybody was using from like the 30s onward, was the non-Perel. The shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I started collecting those. I had 5 at one time. I think I had 10 of them. And I have like a few still. I have like for my own collection. I have like 3 or 4 of them. But I really love that mute. But that mute's squirrely, because if you play low, it doesn't respond well. I mean, I think one of the things that always amazes me when I do use a modern mute, it's like, well, you can blow the low notes on this. You don't have to make any, like a Dennis Wick or something like that. Straight mute. I'm not always crazy about the sound. I like the Joral mutes, which are real popular when I was coming up. They have a real sound to them. They're really rich sounding mutes, and they can play low register, but they don't get the nasal quality that I like to get sometimes. Sometimes I want that nasal, and that's why I go back to the older, particularly the straight mutes, old straight mutes, and even some of the old. And I have Shastok fiber ones, which are great. They're not. You can't get a lot of volume out of them, but they sound great. And it wouldn't work in a modern trumpet section, but
for the stuff you're doing.
Yeah, and I don't actually, I play kind of loud for the idiom, but I don't actually have. The other thing is I don't have to play super loud. I live in a very comfortable volume range, and I can play very soft, because that's from years of playing nightclubs and small rooms. You get to the point where there's a technique that's hard when you got to play whisper soft on a trumpet.
Don't offend the patrons.
Oh my gosh,
the people eating dinner or whatever.
That's another skill that takes Actually, I know. I'm sure you've talked about this on the podcast, but it takes so much more effort to play soft than play loud. I'm more excited if I go on a gig and I'm blatting away. It's one thing, but if I got to play an intimate gig and I got to play soft, that's hard work
with energy. With the appropriate energy,
with making it not seem, exactly, not seem, not like you're not doing your job.
Yeah. Well, we talked about mutes. Yeah. What's your go-to trumpet, cornet, mouthpiece these days?
Well, I've been using. Okay, so this is where my tie-in with Reeves is considerable. So I started off, like I said, playing Bach 1FC. At one point, I was playing on a Claude Gordon personal, not because I was a Claude Gordon guy, because it was an old style vintage. It had a V cup, and I wanted a V cup. Anyway, go through all this stuff. Started playing on a 7DW. I got to that point. So then Brian Shaw, who was a good friend of Bob's, came to Mark and I, and he kind of took us under his wing to some degree. And Brian looked at our mouthpieces and was like, you guys need to do better with your mouthpieces. So Mark was playing on a Parduba double cup, and I was playing on my 7DW or something or maybe at that point, 7DW. And he was critiquing our sounds, because he's very, very upfront. Yeah. And he was like, you guys can do better. So he said, you ever heard of Bob Reeves? And we're like, I'd never heard of Bob Reeves. He says, well, Bob's a friend of mine, and I have all of these mouthpiece experiments. And so I guess that at one point, Brian and Bob were doing a lot of different, Brian was trying a lot of different stuff out, and Bob was making stuff for him. So he had this mouthpiece, and he handed it to me at his recording session and said, here, try this. And I blew it, and I was like, oh, this is a lot better than what I'm blowing on. And he mentioned this word called efficiency, which I'd never heard before in my life. And if you heard me in those days, you would understand why.
Well, you were a bass trombone player.
Exactly.
You were a tuba player.
Well, and he said to me, this is this great line. He says, you can't blow the trumpet like you blow the trombone. He says, you just pick the thing up and you blow it like it's a trombone. You can't do that. It's like, yeah, guilty as charged. So anyway, so Mark came to Mark got involved with Reeves, and he had 2 copies of the mouthpiece made. He had one, and I had one, and it was just some mysterious. There was no marking on it. Brian just handed it to us and said, "Get this copied and use it. Go to Bob and have them done." So he gets these mouthpieces copied, and let's just say that the effect changed my life, playing wise. It made everything easier. And then I had a terrible chop issue in 2005. I could not play anymore. My chops I had no endurance. Everything had failed. So I had to take some lessons because I was like, I can't get out of this hole myself. I just had done it. I had no endurance. My chops felt bad. Everything was bad. I had finally, all of my bad habits had caught up with me. So Brian gave me a couple of lessons, and he taught me, he introduced the idea of efficiency and how you can blow less. I never heard the idea, like I always thought support, air. You can blow less air, but focus it more. And the Reeves mouthpiece was perfect combination of all those things because it was shallow and it was tight. It's relatively tight backbore and shallow. Mm-hmm. And and I went to the 41 rim, mm-hmm. which was also really helpful. Because everything I've ever played on since then, it's always been a 41 rim, or that size, which is like relatively 0.64 or something like that.
Yeah, it's around your 7DW.
Yeah, it was pretty close to the same thing, so it wasn't that bad. So I realized from my own chops, I can't vary from that rim. That is the rim size I have to use. I have to use 0.64. Mm-hmm. That is the rim. That's the magic rim size. So I get this mouthpiece, and all of a sudden I can play again mm-hmm. with his lessons and learning about backing the air off and not blowing so much. And if at that point I could start playing high notes, because at that point my range was concert G, so trumpet A, I mm-hmm. think. That was as high as I could play above the staff. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I could actually hit a C, high C. I couldn't do that. In all those years of playing, I could never do it. And between that and also thinking about hearing the notes in my head, mm-hmm. as opposed to just making the instrument. I for some reason I got in this thing where I was making the instrument do the work for me, but it was backfiring on me. So I was kind of lazy in that respect. And then I started, like, the note I remember is I said, if I can hear a high C in my head, I can hit it. And with the lessons that I took from Brian and worked on my pressure, not playing with as much pressure, getting the efficiency, I was able to start hitting like high C's. So my joke now is every few years I get another note above that. So now I can play a high D. So that's the ceiling. That's my ceiling.
Yeah.
Low and slow,
Hey, but that's a good pace.
But it works because since the professional demands are all within this idiom, mm-hmm. It's not a high note. It's not like a high note gig. So I can work, but it's nice to be able to grab that high C now anytime I want, or a D, or actually an E now. I think I can play an E now. Mm-hmm. And all of it is all based on that thing. I owe the shop mm-hmm. and the whole Bob Reeves, Bob and his philosophy a lot of credit. I don't think I would be playing as well without it, frankly. It's really been important. Can I tell you my Bob story?
Of course.
I have a great Bob story.
Of course.
So I hadn't talked to Bob that many times, but one day I had brought a Selmer balanced trumpet in to be aligned. And I was touring at that time playing string bass with a gypsy jazz band. Because my professional experience is all over the place. Mm-hmm. So we were touring a country. I went to like 48 states with this band playing upright bass. But I'm really good friends with Rob Stewart, and through that I met Bob and this whole LA scene, and then you, of course, mm-hmm. a number of years ago. And I think you were involved in this. Bob was in the shop, and I was in frickin', I don't know, Kansas City or something like that, on the phone, and I just called to see if the alignment had got. I was calling for some reason, calling the shop, and Bob, I think you pick up the phone. And he said, "Hey, Bob wants to talk to you," and I was like, "Why does Bob want to?" I was shocked because I'm just a dude, right? Whatever. And Bob then went on a 15-minute dissertation with me about Selmer trumpets and how they were built. and how they worked. And I was so honored that he just took that time unprompted.
Yeah.
Just pick here. Bob wants to talk to you. And I wasn't expecting, I was just going to talk to you because I talked to you a million times, whatever, no, we're buddies and it's like no big deal. So Bob told me about how the horns were manufactured and how the French manufactured trumpets and how he talked about the receiver, the mouthpiece receiver, how it was different and how they were made by small guys with machinists in town. And he spent 15 minutes and I can't tell you how much, being a fan of information, taking that, having that from a master was just incredible. Totally unsolicited too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bob was like that. He loved sharing information and,
Well, I mean, he knew that I was into the old time horns. And I think that he was kind of, there's a few of us, but well, now there are more of them, but
still not something we see too often.
But yeah, he was really taken by the Selmer trumpet. He wanted to tell me. So he laid that information, and I'll never forget what he told me. Yeah. And it was so weird. It's so incongruous at an airport on tour with another band, and he's talking to me about all of this.
Yeah.
This stuff. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's I miss Bob, and that's he was definitely that kind of guy. He could once you got him going on something.
I just sat there and listened in rapt attention, man.
Yeah,
took mental notes as quickly as I could.
In Kansas City, and it's funny that after you'd been in a number of times too, which is something sparked.
No, I never. He just. I think he'd seen me enough times, and he knew. I've always brought you vintage horns, pretty much. So I think he's one of those vintage guys. So he just laid the info. But I didn't understand any of that stuff, and it was a real interesting window into post World War II, brass manufacturing. Particularly when you think about all the things they had to deal with, like Besson and Selmer coming out of World War II and the devastation of all that stuff, that they were able to produce such high quality instruments out of that mess that was World War II is amazing.
And how they were parted together and who was thinking of what or who wasn't thinking of what.
Also how Selmers are different, really different than Bessons. That stuff is endlessly intriguing to me, even to this day. Just the manufacturing process. Yeah, how great Selmer valves are. If they're in good shape, they're quiet. They do all of the things they're supposed to do, and even they were building those in the 30s like that.
Yeah, almost 100 years ago. Crazy to think about.
I know. That's why I love the vintage stuff. Yeah, so much.
So what's your go-to if you're on a desert island and could bring one cornet and one trumpet?
Oh, it would definitely be my Schilke Beryllium Bell cornet that Mark Caprone's sold me recently. Yeah. That horn is astonishing. And trumpet wise, it's hard because I have a stable 3 horns that I play.
Okay, we can do 3.
So what I would do now at this moment in 2024, whatever day it is today, March, I have a Besson Brevet that's I just picked up not long ago. That's I was telling you before the show is light. It weighs nothing. It weighs 30 ounces, 30.6 ounces, and as resonant as I'll get out. I would take my balanced Selmer, which I very much am enjoying playing right now, and I've had many balanced Selmers, and this is maybe the best one I've ever had. And it's just it was new. It's it was not played a lot. Yeah, and my Marcinko. I have a Marcinkowitz Rembrandt of all things. And of those 3 horns, they pretty much cover my needs because the Rembrandt's kind of like a cornet.
Yeah, with the shepherd's
crook. And it actually has a lot of principles. I know it was probably designed for horn jocks to play high notes on, but I find it to be the closest thing to a trumpet cornet combo. Yeah. And it has a big bell. And although I think the big bell is probably for screamers, I think of it as a throwback to the 19th century cornets, like the Courtois had big bells. So I can finesse that horn really well. I like that one. I also like the workmanship on it because Joe's workmanship it's amazing. Yeah. And it's not even that new. I mean, it's seen a lot of playing and it's still just a gorgeous instrument. Yeah. And plays so well.
Yeah, it's too bad when they announced he stopped making horns a number of years ago. But, he was.
And it has a lot of, it's sort of it has a lot of bench properties to it, but it's darker than a bench. So it's interesting. So the blow is familiar to me, binge through, the Besson through Binge, all that kind of stuff. In the end, it has that kind of a thing going on.
Yeah.
But with the shepherd's crook, so it's blows real open.
So you can bring a quad case to the island with your cornet and 3 trumpets.
That would be it right now.
Cool.
That would be it right now.
Love it.
Yeah.
Two more things I want to touch on before we wrap up here. Number one, doubling, because you still play trombone, you still play tuba as well as sousaphone at all?
Yes, I do. I play all of the instruments.
So what's the trick, if there is one, with doubling successfully?
Well, the trick with doubling, as far as I can tell, is making sure that you spend enough time on the axes, and making sure that you, I don't do any, okay, so here's my thing. I don't cheat. I don't do any, I don't have cheater mouthpiece or anything like that. I do the stuff based on what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. It's mostly just making sure that you spend equal time on the horns. That's what's worked for me. Mm-hmm. So, but it requires a lot of time, practice time. I'm also kind of funny about practicing because I do take days off because of the brutality. I mean, I don't use that term lightly of what I do. Yeah. Playing wise, I have to take days off. There are days when it's just if I have a day, I will take it. Yeah. But then there are days.
If you're doing 5 hours of playing,
even a 3-hour job, depending on how much energy you have to put out.
Yeah.
Like a dance, like these dance jobs, I play in a group that has Nick Rossi's Swing 6, and we do a mini big band thing, me and the tenor sax guy, and it's brutal. The results are great, but I play whole horn section hits for a whole big band, and it's just the two of us, tenor sax and trumpet. And we do a lot of classic repertoire, and so it's even a 3-hour job it's very rewarding. It's a very excellent band, but man, the section, I'm a one-man section, and the tenor guy, he's a one-man section. So we make, and I even do the trombone parts on some of the kind of basic things too if I'm playing. And we do it all by ear too, so it's even crazier. Geez.
But it's like running a marathon,
Yeah, that's what I mean. So I take days. I mean, I'm not ashamed. After listening to this podcast since it started, I feel bad for saying things like this, but I have to take days off.
We've had plenty of guests that say rest is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm a big one. Rest as much as you play kind of guy. If I'm left to my druthers, that's what I do. I'll play. If I have a whole day to practice, 20-minute play, 20-minute off, 20-minute play, I'll do that all day, and I'll sometimes switch axes if I have that. So trumpet for 20, and then I'll take a break. I'll pick up the clarinet and saxophone because I play those too. Play those for a little bit, and then I'll go to trombone. I find that one thing I have learned though as a double is tuba is a great instrument to loosen your face up. And if you can, I would almost recommend to any brass player, if they could, get a tuba to play long tones on a tuba.
Interesting.
Very relaxed, no stress, but you get it gets your air thing going, it gets your air together, and it also helps just loosen up your face. Particularly if you've been playing trumpet. It's like playing it's like pedal tones on trumpet, except it's kind of like a full body massage for that.
You're just engaging everything.
Everything.
Or relaxing everything.
You relax everything. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about playing Mahler tuba parts here. I'm just saying it's a good thing to do. And I've often found when I needed to recenter, I'll pick up the tuba and blow long tones on a tuba.
So switching to listening, you had mentioned Louis Armstrong and the Hot Sevens, Henry Red Allen. Any other folks that you would recommend listening to for people that want to get into the New Orleans style?
Well, there's an awful lot of stuff available these days, and everything's available on the internet. Back in my day, we had to buy records. I invested significant amounts of money in building a record collection. But nowadays, everything's available to you. Yeah. There are modern players that play well, like Bria Skonberg, who plays a lot. I mean, she's a good friend of mine. She plays a lot of different idioms, but she's very good. My friend Gernhild Carling, she's a very good player. There's guys who play in New Orleans still. Wendell Brunis, who's a good player. I don't think he's playing as much anymore. It all depends on there's people to listen to now that can be a gateway to the old stuff. But I pretty much dwell in the world of old recordings. I don't listen to much else, really. I listen to classical music and love classical music. That's why I enjoy the podcast, because I get to hear classical trumpet players talk, which is eminently fascinating to me, how they all are different.
Yeah.
You know, and how, because that's such a demanding. I live in San Francisco, so I've been able to go see Mark Anaway play with the SF Symphony a few times, and Riley, my son, who's a great musician, also marvel at his playing on, like, we went to see Mahler 5. What is the one with the big trumpet solo?
Mahler 5, yeah.
And it was, he owned it.
Yeah.
But we were sitting behind him because we sat behind orchestra, and we were both amazed at how much sound you have to put out in the symphony.
Yeah.
It's just, and so I was like, man, that makes me feel better. It's like, I don't have to make anywhere close to this amount of sound. And he owns it.
Yeah.
But we were just the physicality of it. So, like, I'm really intrigued by that.
And he can play jazz. That's the thing.
I know. And he's
we have to get Mark on
and
here.
he's a nice person,
and he's
too.
a nice, gosh darn it.
Yeah, it's a trifecta, man. No, but like,
but he's a San Francisco Giants fan, so there's got to be.
You got to work that angle. Well, that's true. That's the problem. I'm not going to say anything about baseball on this show. I'll get in trouble. Yeah. So like, as far as that, I think the routine. Like, listening wise, I listen to, basically, I have this thing where I developed this thing in high school where it's like, I'm just going to listen to everything. I'm going to have music on all the time. And through osmosis, hopefully something will rub off. Yeah. And I actually think it's actually worked. And then when I do concentrated listening or critical listening, I listen to traditional jazz, old time jazz, for fun and for nourishment.
Yeah.
Whole nourishment, like the whole experience of, like, yeah, I'm going to play these tunes, but also listening to the greats play and, like, oh my God, that's so great. I mean, you can't listen enough. And if you can live in a world where you're just listening all the time, you're better off. And it doesn't really matter what you listen to. I mean, if it's trumpet, any kind of brass music, you're going to learn. But Armstrong is where it's at. Is the whole thing.
That's the one.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of other things, and I'm really, really interested in very early jazz, pre-Armstrong jazz, which is hard to imagine, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to people, because that's pretty far gone. But like Freddie, I think Mark mentioned Freddie Keppert was he was a great, but those guys, it's harder to reach that. Like, I have a context for it, so I love it, but it might be hard. But if you want something that, like, any period Armstrong is just like where it's at for this kind of idiom of music, for sure.
Awesome. Well, how can folks find out about you, see you play, hear you play?
I'm pretty bad at social media, but I have a pretty good Facebook. I keep my Facebook up to date pretty much. It's for gigs. I basically just use it for gigs anymore. And that's San Francisco Bay Area. And I am also learning how to use Instagram, which is proving to be difficult.
We'll talk to Riley. We'll get you.
Yeah, he's better at it than I am. Yeah.
We'll get you up to speed on that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have the links to your Facebook and.
I'll have to get all that stuff to you.
Yeah. Any projects coming up? You said after your health scare, you've kind of been.
Well, I wanted to. Can I talk a little bit about what happened after my health scare?
Of course.
I had a heart attack and was basically dead. And fortunately was brought back by a famous brass repairman and some really great EMTs. And actually, it happened here in Santa Clarita. I was at a friend's shop that we both know, and I collapsed. Stress and anxiety had basically gotten to me because I've had issues with that. So anyway, I didn't know what was going to happen with my playing. See, this was the whole way. So point is, I had this heart attack. It was a big health scare, life-changing. But of course, being a musician, I was really worried, like, what's going to happen to me now? One of the first things I thought about. So fortunately, when I started playing again after 3 weeks, because I needed to get back playing as quickly as possible, because I didn't want to have to blow into that air, and I needed to develop my lung capacity again, but I didn't want to blow into one of those tubes. So I said, those tube machines. So I was like, I'm just going to start blowing my horn. So I started on trombone because it wasn't much pressure. Because they had to cut me open and do all of this, break the bones and everything. So when I picked up the trumpet again, I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to play anymore. And fortunately, my embouchure had stayed. It was sure enough time where embouchure still stayed hard. So I picked up the trumpet and I could play. But the mouthpiece I was playing, I couldn't play it on anymore. Because I'd been playing, I'd ventured to Proviance. I'd been playing on those for a while, the Proviance reissues, and I couldn't do it anymore. So I went back to my original Bob Reeves mouthpiece that I told you about earlier, but the rim didn't feel comfortable. So Mark had given me the 41W, and I stuck that on there. I put that on the mouthpiece, and everything worked again. And I decided I needed to, I really liked the rim, and it really helped me a lot. And so I was able to come back, and I'm playing better than I've ever played. Oh, amazing. After basically being at the lowest point within like 2 years. That was 2.5 years ago. Wow. And I cosmically owe you guys a huge debt for the mouthpiece, just the whole Bob Reeves logic about how they work, but also the rim and everything. And so I was able to come back, and I'm even amazed that I was able to come back, because I thought I was done for. Like this life, but also mouthpiece wise, I thought playing wise, I thought I may not ever play again.
Well, that's amazing to be able to have that, taken away in an instant. Yeah. Yeah. And to be faced with both that, mortality, and even if you are alive, thank God, but you may not have any musical career left, which is your soul,
It's everything, right?
Yeah.
It was really a lot.
So, I must have changed your perspective on things, or what?
Yeah, it totally changed everything. And I finally learned to deal with my anxiety and stress. Because then one of the byproducts of being a band leader for 40 years is anxiety and stress.
The buck stops with you.
Yeah, and I've been in that position a long time. So anyway, I was able to pull that. But I'm just so happy that I had the resources, through the mouthpiece thing, and through the lessons I'd taken and everything, and all of the stuff I'd done to revamp my playing, in the early 2000s, that I was able to come back and start working out and playing again. And I think if I had the terrible habits I had before my first reckoning about playing, I don't think I would have been able to come back as easily. Yeah. But I was able to think my way through it and get my air support, the efficiency within the mouthpiece, the horn, and the lungs, and all that stuff. I think it really helped me a lot. So.
Oh, that's so great to hear. We get a lot of calls from comeback players that you played your whole life, but
no, but I was definitely a comeback player for that time period.
Yeah, well, and I think what you figured out is you even physically you couldn't do what you could do before the heart attack or whatnot.
No, it was a little different.
You were wiser because
I was
all
smarter.
Of those puzzle
well, also
pieces
the other
connecting.
thing too, John, is it really got me redoubled my dedication to education, because because of the band leading, I've always been an educator, kind of like a layman. I mean, I'm not like a like a real jazz educator, but I've been, and I've used. So now I'm actually I'm giving back by directing the Teagarden Traditional Jazz Camp in Sacramento. I'm the new director there.
Awesome. And
I'm in charge of the whole program. And I'm very excited about this because I feel like it's a great way to get back into the fray.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. You want to talk about that a little bit?
No, I basically, it's a camp for kids 13 to 19, 20. And I just got the job, and I'm working right now and getting everything worked out. The gentleman who did the job before me had had the job for 25 years and did a great job. And so I'm kind of trying to get in there and work. And we have openings for all the traditional jazz instruments: reeds, trumpet, trombone, tuba, drums, piano, banjo, guitar. And I'm really looking forward to doing it. It's a new thing for me. I've been doing education, but this is the first time I've ever had I've done a lot of mentoring. This is the first time I've done on a big scale.
That kind of scale, and kids get in, they learn, they form groups, and
it's all set. It's a good curriculum. It's got a really good curriculum.
Yeah. Probably not have to. It can learn quicker than you did at 13 having to study on
your
own.
Well, I certainly, no, it's a great way to give back. That's the way I look at it, and I'm happy to do it. It's a big job, but I think
cool. Well, congratulations
looking forward to it. And that's kind of like my latest thing. And as far as projects go, I don't have a lot of I did a lot of recording. In the 90s, I was busy doing recording studio work all the time. But since that all dried up, I've gone much more towards education stuff, in different kinds. I've also been a historian, done historical work for Stanford. I did a project for Stanford University, helped with them put together a traditional jazz in San Francisco project. Just a lot. I'll give you the links, and
we'll connect the listeners to all that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, Clint, this has been fun.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
We'll have to do more. Maybe we can get you and Mark on a live stream.
That would be fun. He and I would love to do that.
You guys can I can just be a fly on the wall, and you guys can just tell stories.
Well, yeah, we've got a lot of them. We've done a lot of things.
Yeah,
a lot of road travel.
I mean, I hate to do this to you because you've listened to all 100 and some odd episodes, so you know what's coming.
I know it's coming.
So if you could leave our listeners with your best piece of advice, what would that be?
Play yourself. Play you. Develop your own sound print, your own style, work and make that a big priority. Sometimes you're going to have to play in a section. You're going to have to blend. That's all part of the mechanics of being a professional. But when you have that time for yourself, you find out what you want, make the sounds you want to make. It's such a wonderful thing. There's so many ways to do it. Just figure out your own vocabulary improvisationally, and have your own voice and your own tone. Tone is everything, and make your own sound. That's one of the wonderful things about instrumental music is we can make our own sound. I mean, there's times you have to, like I say, blend and work with other people, but always be thinking about having a sound print. That's it, man.
Absolutely beautiful. Clint,
thank you.
Thanks,
you John.
So much, man. What fun.
Thank you, man. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Clint. And a little side story here. This has been a podcast episode that's a few years in the making. Clint every time he's down in LA, he comes in and pops into the shop either to get something or to hang out. And we've always talked about doing a podcast, and he was scheduled to do an interview a few years ago, right after the pandemic. And that was right around the time when Bob Reeves passed away, and the podcast ended up going on hiatus for a number of months. And so he was so gracious and understanding that we rescheduled his interview, and one of those things that one thing left to another. And of course, he had health issues, and now here we are in 2024. But better late than never. And it was actually great timing because Clint has so many projects in the works right now that he's able to talk about those. Really awesome to have Clint on. He's got such a wealth of information, and we need to get him on the trombone podcast as well because he's a fabulous trombone player as well. But we tried to stick to the cornet and trumpet this time to not bore people with all that slide talk. But if you want to hear slide talk, listen to the Trombone Corner with my friend Noah Gladstone. But lest I digress, Clint has such a long history of playing traditional jazz and other types of swing and jazz music, and it's great to see just how he had that passion for that genre in particular. And no matter what anyone told him and whatever, careers we think we can make with music, he stuck to what he was passionate about and was able to make ends meet. And not only that, but now he's passing on to the next generation to keep that genre alive and in the forefront of musical audiences. So definitely learn more about Clint from his website and, see where he's playing. And if you have a young up and coming player that wants to learn traditional jazz and other types of jazz music, by all means, check out Clint's Jazz Camp, the Teagarden Jazz Camp. Lots of great things going on. So huge thank you to Clint, and thank you for listening. Coming up next, we have Brian Swartz of the former members of Oingo Boingo, and we'll get into that story. But Brian tours with them and plays with them along with his own jazz groups. So stay tuned for next episode with Brian Swartz. Until then, thank you for listening. Let's go out and make some music.